Welcome in, everyone. I am absolutely thrilled to bring you today's explainer because we're going to unpack a deeply moving, incredibly powerful piece of source material. We're looking at a quiet family gathering in San Diego. The date? The 4th of July, 1944. Now, on the surface, this might just look like your standard everyday holiday cookout, but when we really zoom in, this single afternoon beautifully, and honestly, quite heartbreakingly, captures the immense emotional weight of the American home front during World War II. We have a family desperately clinging to this tiny moment of peace, all while the reality of a global conflict breathes right down their necks.
To really wrap our heads around the stakes of this gathering, we need to start with this incredibly poignant quote from Ed. He's a junior naval officer, and he is just about to ship out. When his brother Fred picks him up from the base, Ed rolls down the window, lets that warm July air hit his face, and just breathes out the word, liberty. And Fred replies, "One day's worth." That brief little exchange, it instantly sets up the high stakes of this entire narrative. This isn't just a leisurely weekend off. This is a ticking clock. It's a remarkably limited sliver of time these characters have together before Ed is thrust right back into the war.
That brings us to Section 1, Liberty on the Home Front. We're stepping right into a fragile sort of normalcy on a Tuesday holiday, starting with Fred navigating military bureaucracy just to pick his brother up from the naval base.
When Fred finally finds Ed at the gate in his civilian clothes, looking almost like his regular everyday self, they head back and step into this incredibly rich, grounding, sensory picture in Lyle's backyard. I mean, picture this. The tomatoes are coming in heavy on their stakes, the beans are climbing up the strings, the roses are right in their second flush of the season. The whole yard just smells of summer and good soil. And of course, you've got Emily's famous deviled eggs, universally acknowledged as the absolute best in San Diego County. I just love this contrast. We have this warm, extravagant, perfect domestic normalcy sitting right alongside the unspoken, incredibly harsh reality of the war that Ed is about to enter. Right in the middle of all this backyard perfection, we get this fantastic, quiet interaction between Ed and his baby nephew, Randy. Randy is sitting there on a blanket, and he is just intensely analyzing his uncle. You know that focused look babies get when they're trying to figure someone out? Ed notices this intense scrutiny, turns to Betty and asks, "Should I be concerned?" What's so fascinating here is that Ed doesn't do the usual thing. He doesn't put on a comic, clownish face for the baby. Instead, he asks this question with genuine curiosity, treating the infant's intense gaze with real respect.
And Betty fires back with this absolute gem of a response. "Only if he loses interest. That's when you know you've failed." This prompts Ed to make a completely genuine face of curiosity right back at the baby, and he is instantly rewarded with a tremendous, wide smile from little Randy. It's just such a pure moment, right? The shared tremendous smile provides a crucial, humanizing anchor of joy for the family. It's a quick burst of bright light before the heavier shadows of global conflict inevitably begin creeping into the afternoon.
Okay, let's dive into this. Section 2, Generations in the Garden. Because, as the afternoon rolls on, the older men naturally gather by the greenhouse.
This shift in the afternoon brilliantly illustrates the recurring, cyclical nature of conflict. Think about who is sitting there. You have Austin, who built his house with Della 46 years ago. He represents the deep roots, the past. Then you have Lyle, whose generation fought their own war, World War I. And now you have Ed, representing the present generation fighting in 1944. That's 3 different generations of men, all sitting in the very same San Diego backyard, entirely united by the shared experience of having their lives interrupted and honestly defined by global conflict.
Looking at this long, incredibly tragic historical pattern, Lyle delivers what I truly think is one of the most profound lines in this entire story. He says, "I keep thinking there ought to be a point at which we run out of wars." Notice how Lyle says this. There is no bitterness, it's just a flat assessment. It is the profound, unbitter resignation of a man who has lived long enough to see his generation's war and now his son's generation's war, and is just deeply tired of the pattern.
Section 3, the Pacific timeline compresses. It's here that the conversation inevitably shifts toward the war, acting as an emotional translator for the group's underlying anxieties.
The war is this enormous elephant in the room, and it can only be kept at a distance for so long. Fred asks Ed if the recent events in Europe changes orders. Ed explains that the Pacific has its own logic and its own timeline. But, and this is the terrifying part for the family, because Normandy has held and consolidated over in Europe, the larger picture shifts. When Europe resolves, all those resources shift east. The timeline for the Pacific theater compresses. So ironically, the success in Europe directly ramps up the urgency, the speed, and the danger in the Pacific where Ed is heading. Literally everything must go faster.
Lyle, knowing full well that indirect questions get indirect answers, asks Ed point-blank where he's going. Ed says he can't tell them specifically, only that it's where the work is. Lyle immediately names the highly dangerous strategy, island hopping. And Ed? He refuses to confirm or deny it. But in a conversation like this, that silence acts as its own chilling confirmation.
And that leads us to Section 4, the unspoken farewells. We're now in the late afternoon shadows by the south fence, where the most poignant emotional weights are handled through intense restraint.
The holiday's winding down. Fred and Ed find themselves standing together, looking at tomatoes, but actually thinking about something else entirely. Fred asks how the crew is doing, and Ed shares a very specific, vivid anecdote. He talks about a kid named Kowalski, a gunner's mate from Iowa. Kowalski is 19, just 19 years old. He had never even seen the ocean before this posting. When he first saw the Pacific, he actually thought someone was pulling his leg. Sharing this specific number, 19, really hits home. It highlights the extreme youth and innocence of the men Ed is responsible for.
Fred then asks about the boat itself, the LCIG-728. Ed replies with absolute certainty, saying, "The boat is good, she's right, I know what she'll do, I trust her." What's crucial to take away from this is that trusting a machine in wartime isn't about blind faith. It is about hard knowledge. It is knowing a piece of machinery so perfectly well that your trust is a calculated certainty.
Then the conversation shifts to writing letters. Ed tells Fred not to worry about any gaps in communication. But then, Ed stops. He starts again, and he attempts to voice the ultimate, terrifying what if. He just says, if something...
Instantly, Fred cuts him off with one sharp word. Don't. It perfectly replicates the emotional brevity and the sheer tension of the moment. Fred just cannot bear to hear his brother speak his own potential eulogy out loud in this beautiful, sunny garden.
But Ed pushes back. I need to say it. You can just feel Ed's desperate, deeply human need for closure here. He feels a profound responsibility to acknowledge his potential death, to make absolutely sure his older brother is prepared.
And this is where the true subtextual power of this entire story lies. Fred replies, "I know what you need to say, and I know it. You don't need to say it." The deepest brotherly love here is expressed entirely through restraint. By refusing to let Ed say the words out loud, Fred is sparing them both the finality of that grim acknowledgement.
Right at that moment, Betty calls the men in for the last of the pie. It's a stunningly quiet end to a scene carrying so much heavy truth. As we wrap up this explainer, I want to leave you with a question to silently reflect on. In the face of uncertainty, what remains unspoken in our own final goodbyes? How often is our deepest love shown not by the words we force ourselves to say, but by the heavy truths we lovingly spare each other from hearing? Thank you so much for joining me today, and I'll catch you in the next one.